In 1942, a boy named Theodore, known as Ted Kaczynski, entered the world in a Chicago hospital, the firstborn son to his mother, Wanda, who hailed from a modest immigrant family in southern Ohio. His father, also named Theodore, was a blue-collar intellectual who spent much of his life peddling sausages. In her recollections, Wanda described Ted's early days as those of a happy, normal child. However, this tranquility was disrupted when, around his first birthday, Ted developed hives and rashes, necessitating a week-long hospital stay. Following this experience, Wanda reported a chilling change in her son Ted had become emotionally numb, unresponsive to those around him. While Ted would eventually return to a semblance of normalcy, Wanda believed that this ordeal fostered a deep-seated resentment towards her and instilled in him a fear of abandonment. Ted, on the other hand, offered a different perspective. Reflecting on his childhood, he stated, "I don't think that I was any more anxious about being left alone than the average kid." Furthermore, he noted that by age 13, his parents had ceased to mention this supposed fear until, years later, his mother exaggerated the story, reviving what he termed the myth of his hospital experience. As we delve deeper, we will uncover how this was merely the first of many pivotal moments that would shape Ted's life. In his early years, living in the bustling heart of Chicago, Ted characterized himself as a shy child who managed to forge friendships and socialize within his elementary school neighborhood. However, as the children in his community began to veer towards delinquency, Ted made a conscious decision to retreat, choosing to spend more time in solitude. By the age of 7, his family welcomed his baby brother, David Kaczynski, and soon after they relocated to Evergreen Park, hoping to provide Ted with a more supportive circle of friends. Yet, this transition marked the beginning of a significant turning point in Ted's personality. Upon transferring to a new school, a guidance counselor recognized Ted's exceptional intelligence and recommended that he skip a grade, moving directly from 6th to 7th. However, Ted would later describe this decision as a disastrous misstep. Thrust into a classroom with older peers, he found himself struggling for acceptance and often faced insults from what he termed the dominant or tough kids. Compounding this social challenge was a troubling shift in his home life following the arrival of his baby brother. Ted perceived a change in his mother. Her demeanor grew increasingly pessimistic and verbally abusive. He recounted instances of explosive rage, where her face contorted in fury as she unleashed a torrent of verbal assaults. The combination of social rejection and familial discord drove Ted deeper into isolation, leading him to grow bored with both his friendships and school. In an unusual turn of events, Ted found himself skipping another grade, this time advancing directly to his senior year. By this point, resentment had begun to fester within him, directed towards both his parents and guidance counselors for imposing the relentless pressure to achieve high grades. "I took no pride in my grades and resented the school," he later reflected, admitting to cheating on exams on a few occasions without any sense of shame. With a strong academic record and a keen aptitude for subjects like mathematics, Ted was encouraged to apply to Harvard University. As part of his application process, he was tasked with writing an autobiographical essay, in which he portrayed himself as socially withdrawn and introspective traits that would profoundly influence his experiences at Harvard. At just 16 years old, Ted graduated from high school and embarked on his university journey at Harvard. However, he later expressed that the excitement he was expected to feel was overshadowed by mounting pressure and tension. This was not only due to the academic demands, but also the daunting prospect of living alone for the first time. As he entered this new chapter, feelings of isolation intensified. Ted would clarify, "The statement that I isolated myself from my classmates is not quite correct. It would be more accurate to say that my classmates isolated me. Invitations to socialize were scarce as peers rarely included him in their activities or extended invitations to their rooms. Conversations were limited, and despite his attempts to connect, Ted found their responses consistently unresponsive and indifferent." During his second year at Harvard, Ted found himself persuaded, despite his better instincts, to participate in a psychological study aimed at assessing how individuals respond to stress. The participants were instructed to write essays detailing their personal values and ideologies, which would later be used to interrogate and psychologically assault them. This experiment was characterized as both sweeping and deeply abusive. Unbeknownst to the students, who believed the study would last a single year, it extended over 3 academic years, with Ted reportedly dedicating around 200 hours to it. One might wonder if this was the moment Ted's skepticism towards science and technology took root. Ted himself maintained that while he harbored a strong disdain for the experiment and its conductors, it ultimately had no significant impact on his life. While it's challenging to pinpoint the exact moment Ted's anti-technology ideology emerged, it's plausible that his years at Harvard, marked by a blend of personal turmoil and societal critique, helped him formulate a theory to rationalize his feelings of anger and isolation. Increasingly distanced from his family, Ted began to harbor resentment towards them, particularly feeling that his mother had turned verbally abusive. The pressure to excel academically, compounded by the demands of extracurricular clubs, only heightened his sense of alienation. Socially, Ted struggled. The pervasive snobbery at Harvard particularly irked him. Yet, amid this turmoil, as he delved deeper into his studies, he began to cultivate a belief that technology and science were eroding both nature and individual freedom, an insight he attributed, in part, to his experiences at Harvard. Upon completing his years at Harvard, Ted received an offer for a student teaching position at the University of Michigan, prompting him to embark on a journey towards postgraduate education. However, during his time at Michigan, he found himself growing increasingly disillusioned with mathematics. To Ted, pure math felt less like a career and more like a mere game. He often pondered, if I quit my mathematical career, I could expect to get drafted. The ongoing Vietnam War loomed large in his mind, and the idea of becoming a soldier increasingly appeared to him as just another cog in the machine. Ted resolutely declared, "I would never become a docile and willing slave to the machine," as feelings of hopelessness enveloped him. A dark transformation began, he reflected. Because the future looked utterly empty to me, I felt I wouldn't care if I died in that moment. A chilling thought crossed his mind: why not really kill my psychiatrist or anyone else whom I hate? Ted had long entertained the idea of retreating to the wilderness, and now, this presented the perfect opportunity to act on it. He devised a chilling plan to completely detach himself from society, take the life of someone he despised, and then evade capture long enough to strike again. To finance this dark ambition, he secured an assistant teaching position at the University of California, Berkeley, allowing him to save the necessary funds. By 1972, Ted constructed a cabin in the remote wilderness just outside Lincoln, Montana, where he chose to live without electricity or running water. He would occasionally bike into town to visit the library and supplement his food supply. In moments of solitude in the woods, he found that his anger would often dissipate, and he could momentarily feel a sense of goodwill toward humanity. However, this peace was fragile. It would shatter at the slightest disturbance, like the jarring sound of a sonic boom or the roar of a motorcycle tearing through the mountain meadows. These reminders of civilization, coupled with the unsettling thought that his health might hinge on the whims of those managing atomic waste facilities, would pull him back into a state of discontent. As the years passed, Ted observed the encroaching effects of civilization on the wilderness he cherished. By 1975, his discontent manifested in increasingly aggressive behavior. He began to set small traps in his surroundings, rigging a wire across a motorcycle trail at neck height and vandalizing other campers' sites, smashing windows and slashing tires. Each act of sabotage marked a troubling escalation in his resolve. "My happiness in my Montana hills is spoiled every time an airplane passes over, or when anything reminds me of the inescapability of civilization," he lamented. Amid this growing frustration, a singular motivation took hold. A desire for revenge. He envisioned a plan to kill, targeting individuals he deemed responsible for the destruction of the natural world, especially scientists, businessmen, or any influential figures he could reach. Thus, the groundwork for his bombing campaign was laid. In 1978, Ted constructed a makeshift bomb concealed within a box, meticulously designed to detonate upon opening. After discovering the name of an electrical engineering professor at Northwestern University, he addressed the package to him. However, when he ventured into downtown Chicago, to mail the bomb, he realized it was too large for any mailbox. Undeterred, Ted abandoned his initial plan and left the bomb in a parking lot near another university, hoping that a student or professor would unwittingly pick it up and become a victim of his act. The following day, the package was indeed discovered and delivered to the intended professor. However, his suspicion was piqued, prompting him to contact campus security. As an officer opened the package, the bomb detonated, resulting in only minor injuries. The incident, largely overshadowed by more pressing news, went unreported in the media. Teed later noted, "I checked the newspapers carefully afterwards, but could get no information about the outcome of what I did. The papers seemed to report only crimes of special importance." Undeterred by his previous setback, Ted set to work again. In 1979, he traveled back to Northwestern University, this time concealing a bomb inside a cigar box. That afternoon, a graduate student unsuspectingly opened the package, triggering an explosion that resulted in cuts and burns. Though miraculously, there were no serious injuries. Unlike the previous incident, this explosion garnered attention and was reported in the Chicago Tribune. Ted, upon reading the article, reflected, "Well, at least I put him in the hospital, which is better than nothing, but not enough to satisfy me." His ambitions for destruction remained unquenched, and he lamented, "I wish I knew how to get a hold of some dynamite." Later that same year, Ted escalated his ambitions, setting his sights on a far more perilous target, an airplane. He devised a bomb equipped with a barometer, programmed to detonate at 2,000 feet. However, the device only partially exploded at 34,500 feet, filling the cabin with smoke and forcing the aircraft to make an emergency landing. Fortunately, no one was injured, but the incident raised significant safety concerns, prompting the FBI to launch an investigation. A specialized task force, which included the ATF and U.S. Postal Inspection Service, was established, operating under the codename Unabomb, a reference to the university and airline bombings. The FBI noted the crude, junkyard aesthetic of the bombs, suggesting they were crafted by someone clever, yet still grappling with the intricacies of bomb making. A year later, Ted escalated his tactics once again, mailing a bomb concealed within a hollowed-out book to the then-president of United Airlines. The explosion resulted in severe cuts and burns, but remarkably, the president survived. At this juncture, Ted began leaving misleading clues within his devices, carving the initials flicked into various metal components and including bits of bark or twigs. Over the following years, he continued to mail and plant bombs at different universities and airline locations, each new device increasingly potent. Meanwhile, the FBI struggled to gather forensic evidence to identify the elusive bomber. Now referred to as the Unabomber, they recognized that the bombs were homemade, crafted from readily available materials, and speculated that the Unabomber had a particular interest in wood, given its recurring presence in his bomb designs. Between 1981 and 1985, Ted sent a total of 7 bombs, most of which caused severe injuries to their recipients, although 2 were successfully defused. However, a pivotal shift occurred at the end of 1985. Ted traveled to California to plant a bomb behind a computer store in Sacramento, cleverly disguising it as a piece of scrap lumber. This time, tragedy struck. Upon picking it up, the bomb detonated, resulting in the death of the store's owner. The Unabomber had claimed his first victim. Initially, the FBI believed that the locations targeted, primarily universities, indicated that the bomber would likely be a young individual, leading them to focus their search on those born after 1955. But Ted, born in 1942, didn't fit this profile, leaving room for uncertainty in the investigation. 2 years later, Ted struck again, dropping off another bomb behind a computer rental store that resulted in severe injuries to the owner. However, this time, 2 witnesses reported having seen the man who left the bomb. They described him as wearing a hoodie, aviator glasses, and sporting facial hair. This information led to the creation of the infamous Unabomber sketch, giving the FBI task force a tangible lead to pursue. Buoyed by this newfound attention, Ted grew increasingly confident. He sent a letter to the San Francisco Examiner asserting that the bombings were orchestrated by a terrorist group he called the Freedom Club. It's worth noting that he had previously stamped the initials FC on his bombs. The FBI later confirmed that Ted was acting alone, suggesting that his reference to a group was a calculated attempt to mislead investigators. To validate his claim, Ted included intricate details about his bombs that only he and the FBI would know. At the end of the letter, he articulated his motives. In his letter, Ted outlined a chilling manifesto, declaring that the Freedom Club sought the permanent destruction of modern industrial society. An existence devoid of airplanes, radios, and paved roads? He argued that even if a small elite of leaders and experts governed society with good intentions, they would inevitably exploit and manipulate the populace to sustain the system. However, the San Francisco Examiner chose not to publish his letter, later denying ever having received it. Following this setback, Ted retreated into the shadows for a 6-year hiatus, during which the bombings faded from the public eye, and the FBI made little progress in uncovering the identity of the Unabomber. Ted returned with renewed ferocity. In a single weekend in 1993, he dispatched 2 bombs. One targeted geneticist Charles Epstein, while the other was aimed at accomplished computer scientist David Gellertner. The detonation of the first package resulted in devastating injuries, shattering Epstein's arm and severing 3 of his fingers. The second bomb inflicted severe damage on Gellertner, rendering his right hand useless and causing him to lose sight in one eye and hearing in one ear. However, Ted's reflections on Gellertner were more contemplative. He described him as no cliché, but a highly intelligent, thoughtful, talented, and sensitive man. Ted acknowledged, "I consider that he deserved what he got, but that is a judgment that I do not adopt lightly, and it is one about which I have mixed feelings." During the period when the Unabomber was making headlines, the concept of radical environmentalism was not a new phenomenon. Various groups and organizations had already championed this ideology. One notable group, Earth First, focused on direct action rather than traditional protest methods. Due to their aggressive tactics, some began to draw parallels between their activities and Ted's own. While it was true that some members of Earth First expressed admiration for the Unabomber, Ted viewed the group more as reformists than revolutionaries. He appreciated their passion, but believed their approach lacked the radical intent that he embodied. In a correspondence with Earth First, Ted urged the group to shift their focus from protecting small parcels of land to launching a more aggressive assault on the industrial system. The final 2 bombs he crafted, in 1994 and 1995, would prove to be his most potent. The first targeted advertising executive Thomas Mosser, who had played a pivotal role in helping Exxon restore its image following a disastrous oil spill 5 years earlier. On the day of the attack, Mosser's wife and 2 daughters were in an adjacent room, engaged in a playful tea party when the package detonated, taking Mosser's life. He was discovered lifeless on the kitchen floor by his wife. Officers responding to the scene described the incident as particularly devastating. The final bomb Ted mailed targeted Gilbert Murray, the president of a timber industry group in California. Upon opening the package in his office near the state capitol, Murray was killed, marking the end of the Unabomber's bombing campaign. However, Ted's actions were far from over. In April of that same year, he dispatched a series of letters to various newspapers. In these letters, he claimed to possess a lengthy article, ranging from 29,000 to 37,000 words, that he wanted published. He stipulated that if the article were published according to his requirements, he and his group would permanently cease all terrorist activities. In his letters, Ted made it clear that the article would not explicitly promote violence, propose the overthrow of the United States government, or contain any obscenities. He insisted that the piece must be published in its entirety and demanded that no attempts be made to arrest him or his associates. While pledging to cease acts of terrorism, he maintained that they would reserve the right to engage in acts of sabotage. He also sent letters to various individuals, warning them that it would be in their best interest to halt their research in specific fields. Approximately a month later, Ted left his cabin in Lincoln and mailed 3 copies of his manifesto to the New York Times, Washington Post, and Penthouse. Amid these developments, Ted sent a letter to the San Francisco Examiner threatening to blow up an airplane within the following week. This alarming declaration prompted a significant increase in airport security across the state, and the FAA instructed airlines to halt the acceptance of any mail arriving or departing from California, grounding nearly 400,000 packages each day. However, no bomb was ever discovered in any of the packages or detonated. In a subsequent letter sent to the New York Times, the Unabomber remarked, "Since the public has a short memory, we decided to play one last prank to remind them who we are." He added, "But no, we haven't tried to plant a bomb on an airline recently." After exchanging letters with several publications and approximately 3 months of weighing the pros and cons of publishing his manifesto, the Washington Post finally included it in their September 19th edition. It opened with the now infamous line, "The Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race." In the manifesto, Ted argued that the industrial technological system had inflicted severe damage on the natural world, leading to widespread psychological suffering and even physical harm to individuals in developing countries. He warned that if this trajectory continued, humanity would be reduced to mere engineered products and cogs in the social machine. Ted's proposed solution was not to overthrow the government, but rather to destabilize the technological and economic foundations of society. He began with a critique of modern leftism, asserting that leftists as a community often grapple with feelings of inferiority and hypersensitivity, among other issues. He cited examples of leftists attaching negative connotations to seemingly harmless terms like chick oriental or handicapped, noting that the individuals most offended by these words often do not belong to the groups they are intended to describe. Furthermore, he argued that many leftists ultimately seek to conform to societal expectations, even as they outwardly present themselves as rebels. Ted illustrates his point by discussing how white leftists advocate for the inclusion of black individuals in high-profile positions, such as scientists and executives. He argues that this reflects a desire among white leftists to compel black people to conform to white middle-class ideals. He notes, however much he may deny it, the over-socialized leftist wants to integrate the black man into the system and make him adopt its values. Critics of the manifesto often question why Ted delves so deeply into his critique of leftists, especially when he later addresses society as a whole. While his observations are not entirely disconnected from his overall argument, many believe they stray from his main point, suggesting that he is simply venting his frustrations. Ted then introduces the concept of surrogate activities, arguing that modern individuals, no longer burdened by the need to expend significant effort to meet their basic physical needs, create artificial goals to occupy themselves. These goals manifest in various forms, including scientific pursuits, athletic achievements, and sports. He contends that this disruption of the natural power process, the effort required to achieve meaningful goals, leads some people to seek fulfillment vicariously through other avenues. For instance, he cites Americans who attempt to satisfy this power process through their involvement with the military, corporations, and political systems. Ted continues by scrutinizing the motives of scientists. While scientists often justify their research by claiming a desire to benefit humanity, Ted challenges this assertion. He argues that many fields, such as archaeology and linguistics, do not provide any tangible benefits to society. More frequently, he posits, scientists pursue their research to satisfy their own power processes, leading to a form of science that progresses blindly, indifferent to the genuine welfare of the human race. A central theme of Ted's manifesto is individual freedom, or rather, the lack thereof. He articulates this point powerfully in a journal he penned a few years earlier, urging readers to consider the myriad evils imposed by the system: air and water pollution, the looming threat of atomic war, and overcrowding, to name just a few. He argues that an independent individual can at least take responsibility for alleviating their own hardships. For instance, if one feels cold, they can make a fire. If game becomes scarce, they can seek out areas where it is more plentiful. In such scenarios, their decisions hold significance. They are not entirely helpless. However, Ted raises a critical question: what can an individual do about air pollution or overpopulation? His conclusion is stark: the essential aspects of an individual's life are predominantly controlled by large organizations. In Ted's view, the individual remains largely powerless to influence these larger issues. He asserts that while individuals can make their own choices, such as where to live, what clothes to wear, and which job to pursue, these decisions are trivial in the grand scheme of the system. To the surprise of many, the Unabomber's manifesto was not only coherent but also somewhat agreeable. Reactions were mixed. Some critics acknowledged that it was well-researched and fairly focused, while others argued that his violent actions undermined his message. Still, there were those who simply called for him to be imprisoned. Amid the chaos of 3 deaths and 23 injuries, Ted expressed a belief that, somewhere within his lengthy manifesto, there were passages that would resonate with someone who might say, "I recognize this, I think I know who this guy is." He also voiced concerns regarding the implications of publishing his manifesto, suggesting that by doing so, the 2 newspapers were mistakenly under the impression that they were enhancing public safety, effectively guaranteeing that the Unabomber would refrain from further attacks. He cautioned that this was a perilous trap for news organizations to fall into. They remained unaware of his identity, had no legal recourse to prevent him from striking again, and ultimately had entered into a dangerous agreement, devoid of any real control. The manifesto marked a potential breakthrough for the FBI, who hoped that someone might recognize Ted's writing, perhaps a former professor, student, or even a relative. Indeed, the FBI gleaned valuable insights from the manifesto. For instance, Ted's use of words like broad and chick suggested he was likely older than they had initially assumed. Additionally, it indicated that the Unabomber had roots in Chicago, as some of the terminology reflected the language used in Chicago newspapers during the 1950s. Amid the growing interest surrounding the manifesto and the tips pouring into the FBI task force, one individual would ultimately recognize the writing, paving the way for Ted's arrest: David Kaczynski, Ted's own brother. For some time, David's wife had suspected that the Unabomber was Ted. However, David, firmly convinced otherwise, often dismissed the thought. Initially reluctant to act, David eventually decided to send a copy of what appeared to be a rough draft of the manifesto to the FBI, asserting that the author was his brother. After reviewing the material, the FBI grew increasingly confident that both the manifesto and Ted's previous writings were penned by the same individual. Consequently, on April 3rd, 1996, years after Ted's bombing campaign began, he was arrested at his cabin in Montana. During his trial later that year, Ted was sentenced to 8 life sentences, successfully avoiding the death penalty. Descriptions of him from those in his community painted a stark contrast to the persona of the Unabomber. He was characterized as a quiet individual who never caused trouble, rarely frequented bars, and simply went about his life without drawing attention. Those who engaged him in conversation often found him to be articulate and intelligent. "He just wasn't the type of person I would have ever suspected of being the Unabomber," remarked one local resident, highlighting the dissonance between Ted's outward demeanor and his criminal actions. What's particularly intriguing is that even decades after Ted's arrest, his manifesto continues to resonate with the public, especially among younger generations. Many perceive its themes as more relevant than ever. There is a widespread apprehension regarding the implications of pervasive technology on human life and the potential consequences of rapid technological advancements for society at large. Numerous young people relate to the anti-tech sentiments articulated in the manifesto, recognizing the detrimental effects on societal well-being. Growing up surrounded by screens and addicted to near constant media consumption, many feel a sense of personal entrapment within a technological framework that undermines basic social skills. Having grown up in an era characterized by escalating fears surrounding climate change and the perception that traditional politics are inadequate to address pressing issues, many young individuals find resonance in Kaczynski's manifesto. Throughout his life, Ted Kaczynski left a profound and enduring impact on society, particularly through his critiques of the system and the ramifications of his 17-year bombing campaign. Ultimately, Ted died at the age of 81 in what was suspected to be a suicide. However, the effects of his ideology and actions continue to influence generations.